Hello and welcome back to devlog number 5. In this episode we are going to be talking a little bit about serialization and networking. So, first of all, what even is serialization? Serialization is the process of converting data into a more easily transmittable form. That could be saving your game progress to a file that the game then can easily load again, or loading an NPC file that describes a character's appearance and stats. In my game, each object will be constructed using entities, which are the smallest building blocks we will have. An entity can have different components attached to it, such as a texture, collision box, or a script. They can also be combined with other entities to form hierarchies, which allows us to create more complex objects or behaviors. So for this I have created an entity editor, or at least I've started working on one. It's still very early in development, but it will be very useful very soon. So, opening the editor, you can see that we have a few different types of entities we can use. And you might think, why would we need different types of the same thing? Why complicate it? But the reason I decided to add these categories is because of the multiplayer part. As the client, we want to help the server out in as many ways as we can. Because if the server was to be responsible for updating every single part of the game, it would be an absolute enormous load for the server to have to deliver all the packets that we would need. It would also be a ton of data for the client to receive and process as well. But there are a few ways we can help the server out. Picture this scene. We have a level containing some trees, a couple of houses, a stone wall, and some grass. We also have a player fighting a couple of enemies. So if we take a step back and analyze this scene a little bit, what does the server actually need to tell the client about? These trees are not really doing anything. They have collision, but they won't go anywhere or be destroyed. The same goes for the houses, the grass, and the stone wall. These entities are part of the level itself, so it only makes sense that we make them a part of the level file. And that way both the server and the client knows that they are there and what ID they have, because they are not dynamically spawned while playing, but instead they are a part of the level. So let's call these shared entities. Now, if we instead look at these effects or the projectiles, they are created while playing and are not part of the level file. But we also don't need the server to create and update these effects for us. We could help the server out by only listening for damage events and then locally spawn and update the appropriate effects. These enemies, however, we do need to know when they are spawned, what ID they have, when they move, if they are damaged or when they die. So in this case, the server is responsible for updating the client about these entities. So let's call them server entities. Okay, so I thought I would have a quick little preview here on how it's working so far. So I want to make a player character. Again, really simple. The functionality is still very limited. So what we need to do is we need to create a server entity. And in this server entity, we can then add a few components. As of now, we only have 2 components we can add, the texture and the physics components. So let's start with the texture. And here we have a few different parameters we can change. So texture file name, I am going to put this texture, and if I click apply, you can see that nothing is showing up. That's because I need to change the UV coordinates here. So region height, if I remember, this texture is 16 by 16, so I'll put that there. And now we have our little guy here. We can also add a physics component. You can see now when I added this component here, we have a hitbox. So what I want to change is the radius. I'll set that to 0.5. That looks good. And for the body type, it's not very clear, but 0 means static. If I set this to 1, it will be dynamic. And if I set it to 2, it will be kinematic. It's kind of difficult to see, but this circle changes color. But I want it to be dynamic. We can also change mass and drag. We can set it to have a fixed rotation, which I think I will do. And yeah, now we can save this entity. And if we wanted to, we can also add some other local entities underneath if we wanted to. But we don't really want that right now. So I'll grab this, I'll save this. I'll save it as player. You can see I already have a file with that name, but I will overwrite it. And if we go into my player system, we can see that when a player connects, he receives the player.ent prefab. Okay, so here we are in the game. And you can see that it looks quite a bit differently from how it used to. And that is because I have rewritten the entire engine. So we have taken about 30 steps backwards, but instead we have taken some very good quality steps forwards. Because now we actually have multiplayer implemented. So I can do this. Now we see we have the server here, the server character, and we also have the client character. You can see there's a bit of delay. The kind of physics synchronization is definitely a work in progress. But basically the physics is sending out its updates, I think 10 or 20 times a second, which is why there's a bit of delay, because I'm using interpolation. But all of this is going to be smoothened out a lot in the near future. And we can also spawn different entities, for example this cheese. And you can also see that the interaction between the client and other physics objects are a bit strange. That's also something I'm gonna have to work on. But otherwise, I think this is super duper cool. I think it's a great start. And something we can actually do to make it a bit cooler is maybe we can add a name tag to the players. Because you see we have a players list here. So we have the server player and we also have player 2. So I'm gonna start off by adding a font. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fetch each player we have in the game, and I'm also gonna check what entity they have assigned to them. And then I'm gonna draw their player name on top of the entity they're controlling. Okay, it's a bit quick and dirty, but it works, and I think... Oh wait, it doesn't actually work. Well, hold on just a minute. That doesn't work at all.